second ago. There we go. I had this fortuitous, I ran an anagram generating program on my name and discovered that it spells orchestrate clangmass. So this is this discovery that sort of maps, remaps my name, not in the sonification, but still implying a sonification possibly. And it sort of also speaks to some of the ways of my own processes. So here's an introduction. There's my web page, and there's the web page. I just can't help myself sometimes with these things. And so, oh, thank you. Of course. And so, I suggest that if you give a chance, you might. This is not the only work that I do at all. I consider myself a musician, composer, performer, instrument builder. Well, I think it even says it up there. Anyway, educator, theorist. And so, and when I got the request to do this piece, I was reminded of the fact that the actual terrain work was from the early 90s, and I hadn't revisited it, and I'd moved on to other sonifications, which I'll talk about later. But it also was an opportunity for me to revisit this, what I consider some of the most interesting work I did, at least in that period, and maybe in the entire time that I've done work. Fascinating. And I found, during the writing of the papers that were associated with that work, this quote from Heidegger that I found to be so succinct. The song still remains which names the land over which it sings. And that's Heidegger walking in the woods, thinking about that, of course. I happen to know. The truth is that it just is poetic, and it sort of covers some of the territory of which attracted me to investigating this area. But more fundamentally, Cage played an important role in the way that I think about performance and putting material together as a composer and performer. And particularly for this work, the songbook from 1970, which is a collection of instructions that are supposed to be performed over an undetermined amount of time in parallel. And they create a sort of a happening, I guess. Whoa, like that. And this is a picture from an actual happening that happened. And the thing about it is there's an incongruence, of course, to knowing what Cage was, what his strategies were, what he was telling the performers, and there's this sort of element of surprise. And this might explain to Peter why I was so, I knew I was giving this symposium, so I was a little bit reluctant to explain what was going on with this sort of overcomplicated piece I played last night. And so, my apologies. It was a sort of aesthetic decision. I'm not sure if it was correct, but it's the one I made. And I, so anyway. Okay, so let's get down to the real deal. Is Rich Gold's terrain reader from an article in the Computer Music Journal by John Bischoff, Rich Gold, and Jim Horton describes an early version of an inspiration, I should say, for the work that I did later on. And in this, it's an imaginary land that he creates. And he has a scenario. He actually did he had a thing called the Pet Person for the Commodore 64. Brilliant. He died way too early. He ran the Xerox PARC program, and a brilliant theorist and thinker, and just an inspiration for all of us in the community there in the San Francisco Bay Area. And his book, which is on MIT Press now, I highly recommend to anyone interested in the media arts. He genuinely was a brilliant genius. And he came up with these sort of imagination, use of imagination that was so rich and carried many of us along into this. He was one of the original members of the League of Automatic Music Composers with John Bischoff and Jim Horton and several others, David Behrman. Okay, so let's get to the, whoa, that's nice. Okay, so graphical information systems are any systems that capture and store, analyze, manage, and present data. And these are the classifications. There's the, well, customers maybe not. That's more Jens' area. But streets, parcels, elevation. That's one of the sets of GIS data. This is the one I'm focusing on. But land usage, and then there's, of course, the always troublesome real world, which I don't deal with as well as I do with this other one. Okay, so we did this piece, McCall.dem, the first of these elevation pieces, and it is a piece that's based on a free map that we got. And it was of McCall, Idaho. And I have to say, and one of the most interesting aspects of this is that I've never been to McCall, Idaho. I don't know where McCall, Idaho is, really. I have to always, I type it in automatic on the Google map when I go there because I know it's somewhere north of Boise, you know. I've never been to this place. My friend sent me the postcard you see on the right. So that's, I know now that it exists. My other experience of it is with Google Earth, which isn't exactly, and you too last night, that was me flying over Google with this navigation device, flying over the Google Earth model. Now I'm being a little flip in this next one, but the reason why we used McCall.dem is the USGS at that time would give the university the free data files that you needed to have the and what those produced were this ready-made, which I thought it was so great that there was this flip over thing with the ready-made. I didn't do that. This was just here, so it's fantastic. And I've got to say the precursor to Cage, the inheritor, is Duchamp. And also, I personally am informed of the sorts of processes that Duchamp used to create new work, I think, very fundamentally, to create processes that are sort of inexplicable, and yet you try to be rigorous to them. And even though the result is maybe not clearly understood, there's an outcome, an artifact, an emergence. So latitude and longitude give you these elevations. That's the thing. That's all. Just like John's tide, this piece particularly is just the singular set of information. And so it's constituted of a series of travelers that are software entities that use that elevation data as parametric controls or as compositional determinants, depending on again, going back to the Cage, the massive parallelism that we brought to bear on doing that. So let me just go to the kinds of things you can do. This is the actual data, and then there's the inverse direction. Oh, I just can't help myself. I'm sorry. So you can use these to generate MIDI data for MIDI instruments by sending these travelers along these lines that you make in XY space, and you get the offset of the elevation. And you can go in either direction of this line, and you can even do this line at audio rates and create an audio file that is swept along this line that actually plays the Earth, which gets very close to this Heidegger quote, even though I'm sure he didn't intend that at all, but that's what happens. Well, now this may be way too loud, but we'll see what happens, so you might want to, here we go. So that's the line spinning on the Earth, the Grand Canyon in this case, and playing back a waveform. The advantage of making the symmetrical shape is that there's no artifact of a sharp edge that would add extra harmonics. So the harmonic information you're hearing is exactly the land's harmonic information at the precision of the rendition.
Along the line?
Yeah, the line as it spins. So, you can imagine the traveler going back and forth along this line. And so if you take these lines and you give them just ratios in relationship to each other, then you can imagine a series of lines that have an intonation relationship to each other, that play soft, and if they're on a lake, they don't make any sound because the lake in the elevation model is a flat line. So we did a lot of trajectories of the centers of these lines through the lake in order to make them go quiet and that sort of thing. So let me see, this is oops, what happened? So this is a little bit from one of the performances. It's not all the lines, but you can hear some of them spinning around here. This was on a Next machine, and so I couldn't quite replicate some of the archival recordings that I used to play back things. You get the idea. These lines are spinning, and they're playing McCall, Idaho, basically, like that. So this is one of the several travelers that were. And then there was the drunken boatman strategy, which is a random boat. Well, these lakes were this place of silence, but if you're using algorithmic processes for the traveler's path, then they end up on the lake, and so we started just focusing on the lakes, actually. And initially we called it the Drunk Jesus, but I live in America, and it can become problematic, so it became the Drunken Boatman. And so the random boat goes around, and there's an anecdote that's associated with this. My friend did go to McCall, Idaho, and there was a police arrest of a drunken boatman who ran a boat up into the center of town when he was there. It was like this complete, synchronicity that was fantastic. Anyway, so here's a little bit of that sort of thing. So this is the filtering. As the boatman goes along, the distance to the shore is being recalculated. So you can hear, he's approaching the shore, you can hear. So it's not the actual, so this is a harmonic line being fed through this filter that's the drunken boatman. So this is another reason why I didn't start explaining things last night. This is really these very complicated behaviors that are, sort of and I was going to do this, so I apologize. This led to the balloons in a canyon idea, which were basically like the drunken boatman, but they had more deliberate tasks. We didn't give them a drunk walk, we gave them trajectories that vectored through canyons that we found on the map. And then they did the same thing. They set out a series of 6 lines that changed resonant filter settings. And and this actually goes to a later piece, but there's these are Grand Canyon blimps navigating above you can see that's a screenshot that I found from the archive from these performances. I've got to say the performances were the one we did at ICMC in 1992 was 2.5 days long. And we had a tent, and I do have video of it, but I opted not to show it. So it was a different sort of cultural context than what's happening now. You don't get these 2.5 day things. Sounds a lot like the other part, actually. It might even be part of the same thing. Same section of the piece. I mean, I was just... Okay, so now one of the final travelers for this McCall piece is where there's the imaginary pelican, and we imagined that the notes were bowling balls, and it was flying along a Hilbert curve, which is this curve on the upper right there, which is a space-filling curve, which I was attracted to at the time, and we had figured out how to render, and so I had to use it. And so the imaginary pelican is flying, and every time it turns, it drops a bowling ball. And it has 12 bowling balls before it repeats this bowling ball, and it's dropping the tone row from Webern's Opus 28 onto which is the one that spells Bach. Da 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 da. Anyway, and you can see a rendition from the next machine of the particles, which are the bowling balls, hitting the Earth, and then we had the physics model, and this is pretty early, so I'm impressed with where we're at. The physics model of it bouncing, and so it bounced and created a MIDI note of the velocity. So something would have an impact that would be strong, and then it would bounce and be softer, and so like that. And so that was the imaginary pelican scenario. I mean, you can see there were others. Actually, I stopped here. I had maybe 15, 16 types of travelers, as we called them, and we would turn them on and off, and we even scheduled them to come on at different times when we wanted to sleep and stuff like that. But it was always changing, and it was always just in this rectangle of this place in Idaho that I've never been to. Okay, so here's a combination. So there's that bell. You can hear that's me going up and down a hill. And the voices in the background were the pelican dropped balls and that kind of stuff. Okay, so then there was one more. The circular travel came later, and this was a circle. And actually, in terms of the user interface ones that we built for the Exploratorium later in the 90s. This was one that we could give to kids, and they really got a kick out of it because they could move the circles around, and it would play these rhythms. And if they left the circle set, it would go. So you had this looping, and you actually could do proportions of these circles, so it sounds something like. The rhythm part. The other thing is the line. Okay, you get the idea. That's that was actually. The circles were going around, the remap was hitting these whackers, which were hitting blocks of wood and drums and stuff in acoustic space, not over speakers. They weren't samples. Anyway, okay, so the Hub is a interactive computer network band I've been involved in since the 80s. Now, I'm moving off the elevation model thing and on to newer works that use sonification. And the interactive, am I okay? Yeah. Okay, good. The interactive. Oh, okay, good. The interactive. Oh, hey. It's an interactive computer music network band. This diagram gives you a sense of what's happening. This was at least in the MIDI realization. We started in 1985. This is post the League of Automatic Music Composers, which I referred to with Rich Gold and them. And then we did this next generation of what became laptop music. At the time, laptops didn't exist, so you couldn't really call it laptop music, but whatever you want to call it. And Nick Collins, Peter's associate, was responsible for consolidating us into what became the Hub. But anyway, that's a whole other story. The truth is that if I played something over channel 3, Tim would receive something over channel 7 in the MIDI version, just to give you an idea. So it is a fixed network. And this is getting to Jean's thing. It's a fixed network, and yet this entire Zodic just released a 3 CD set, retrospective with this pamphlet and everything. It was very gracious of John Zorn to do this, which is a lot of material, a lot of pieces, a lot of tours, a lot of music, all with this fixed network. And it's the flux, I realized. We never talked about it in this way, but it was the flux that we were playing. We never played, well, there's a few pieces where I played trombone and stuff, but basically it was all electronic music. And it was just different recipes for this fixed nodes. And so I thought it was very insightful to hear that. The piece that I did that's directly used the word sonification in the title, I thought was relevant to the discussion here. And this is a very interesting topic. If you go to noosphere.princeton.edu, you can get access to the Sonification of Global Consciousness project. And the way to summarize this is that there's a scientific anomaly where they've distributed essentially the strips from inside of smoke detectors, which are not, they're physical, slightly radioactive strips, and they give a 0, 1, they're randomly, like maybe the same as you'd hear on a Geiger counter for radiation, but the inverse, they're generating this random. And so, and these are distributed through this project to what they call eggs, and you can go to this site. I'd recommend it's very, very interesting. I mean, I could go to it now, but I want to keep it concise. And so I just recommend going to Noosphere, O-O. It's from Terre de Chardin, N-O-O, sphere. Okay, the anomaly is that when something happens, like what's a recent event? The earthquake in Chile, and it's on the world news, and everybody in the world is concerned, or not everybody, but a lot of people are concerned about this thing. The randomness changes in not predictable, but in discernible ways. In other words, when the consciousness of all humanity focuses on something, they can detect this with this thing, and it's a complete anomaly. It has, it's just kind of a mind-boggling anomaly, actually, literally. And so I got really interested in this, and so we do this piece where I can retrieve the UDP packets from these places all over the world, and we play it, at the moment that it's happening. So it's a sonification of the global consciousness, sort of. I mean, it's basically just a random number generator, frankly, but what are you going to do? Sort of goes like that for a while. Okay, so Trees on the Internet is a project in collaboration with landscaper, world-class trombonist, performance artist, and Toyoji Tomita, who was his name. So there was a site created. It's down right now. Otherwise, I could show it to you. That used these sensors called Grenier sensors, as shown in the bottom there, and you heat up the outside of the tree, and then the sap flow, which changes direction during the course of the day. It's sort of like the tides thing, actually. It's very similar in some ways. Depending on the amount of sun, or and you can definitely see this flow of from the phylum, from the outer. Let's see. Let me get the right term. Yeah, the phleon, I guess it's called, and the case sapwood, but it's the one just inside of the bark that has the real info. But anyway, the sap flow is detected that way, and so we had these trees in the Francogawa Plaza in Oakland, which. Toyoji happened to be the landscape architect and designer for, as well as being a Curtis Institute and Juilliard trained trombonist and performance artist in his own right, which is like all of us have, the many hats thing. Unfortunately, Toyoji passed way too early. A couple years ago. It was very tragic. So I generated this Toyoji song with sensor data from the Camilli vineyard, and it was a memoriam to him when it happened. And so, God, I'm getting all choked up. I can't believe it. Anyway, the interesting backstory on this winery is that, there we go. A moment of silence, that's what that was. Is that Mark Haller, with David Tudor, was the Intel engineer and designer of the electronically trainable analog neural net, ETAN. Anyway, neural net chip synthesizer. And this is the only circuit that's an actual silicone replica of what they thought, at least at the time, in cognitive theory, what the brain looked like. In other words, it was 128 in, 128 out. And, you got what you got. It was fantastic thing, and I love this, and I had the opportunity, when I worked with David Tudor, he introduced me to Forrest Worthman, who introduced me to Mark, and he let me use this synthesizer. That's another topic, but Mark ended up getting out of Intel just in time at the top of the bubble and buying this vineyard. And of course, he's an Intel engineer, so he doesn't just make wine in this vineyard, although he does that quite well. Very good Cabernet. But he also put these Crossbow Echo wireless network throughout the vineyard, all 40 acres. I think it's 40 acres. Maybe it's 4.4 acres. It's big anyway. Bigger than I have. It's my vineyard. And these are self-organizing wireless network that if any of you heard this story about Smart Dust, this was one of the companies that was going to make this non-existent Smart Dust that it's not going to happen. But if they did, they would use, shrunk down versions of this thing that ends up being like about 10 pounds and about this big. So it's very bigger than a grain of sand by a long shot. But in any case, it can sense their temperature, humidity, soil moisture, No grenier, no sap flow, but that was okay. This is plenty of information, as you'll see in the next map. When it comes up, yeah, there it is. There's the actual map of where the sensors are. And this is a little bit of Toyoji's song from one of my sites. A little loud. Sorry. In any case, this was generated directly. In this case, it's a physical model that's generating this line that's a collection of this self-organizing network. But the timbres, each of the timbres changes every time there's a new note, depending on the changes of state of the different sensors throughout the vineyard. That's the nature of that piece. So. And this has led to a collaboration with Xinjiang Huang in Taipei, Taiwan. We haven't quite got this one. We're working on it. It is a tree quartet, something like the earlier one. We'll use these same sap flow sensors and probably the echo thing as well. I'll probably try to create it with an Arduino because the echo things are just, unless Crossbow will gift us this thing, it's a fairly expensive system. And so this is an ongoing, so when I got this call about the sonification thing, it was just sort of fortuitous that I'd returned to this area, because my other work is, had gone all over to this other place completely. And I'm so grateful, I wanted to say, to be reminded of this early terrain work, and now it's rekindled my interest in it. I think it's a fascinating area. I'd gotten to this sort of massively parallel state, just because the technology is more and more like that. And I think I like the aspect, and this is something I've learned at this symposium, I like the aspect of John's work and that early work of mine where you just take this one single thing and you investigate it from some perspectives. I think I maybe used too many. It was more the nature of the way performance was at that time. I think I would probably go closer to your current model with the tide, with more refinement and a little closer to the, or more reductive, I'd say. But anyway, so what's the future then? For me, it's possibly this idea that I was so happy to find that Peter was in the same sort of area with not exactly the same thing, but I'm started to look at making an iPhone app or some sort of GPS. The initial thing was just a hack together a iPhone app that sort of works and would never get through the Apple Store, so I can't demonstrate it right now, but I did get something to work. And basically using some form of the travelers, not unlike Jean's fish, creating a bubble around yourself that is playing where you are. And as you move, you hear some distance of where you are. And the idea would be to make it pleasurable, hopefully, or maybe give other composers, besides my own, like kind of chromatic tastes, an opportunity to use the gamut that they might, which was the word I would suggest, by the way, for the pitch class controversy. Anyway.
The pitch gamut, you would suggest?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a gamut. I believe that's right. And that would include intonation, so that's why it's a little stronger term. Anyway, but I digress. So we'll see what happens with this, but I'm really grateful for the inspiration to return to this material. I really wanted to say that. And finally, that's it.
We just don't have enough time to do that justice. In the same way that we don't have enough time to do justice to the two previous presenters. But I want 2 questions from the audience, please, to any of the many things that Scott talked to you about.
Oh, good. I covered it all.
The idea of the travelers is a wonderful metaphor
Yeah.
So I think we have a few there that are really nice for that purpose.
Yeah, and you know, we created these improvising instruments where we improvised using the Travelers,
Exactly.
which has this implication for the two-way kind of talking that Jean was mentioning, because you can present that, like the Circle Traveler particularly, which we had in an exhibit in the Exploratorium that let kids like push the circle around on the map and stuff like that. Yeah, I think you know, and we just stopped working on it. There was no money. Well, there's always no money, but you know, it was just one of those kinds of things where we had to move on. But I think it's rich enough that I'm grateful to be returning.
Well, I found the idea useful in Walk on the Sun, for instance.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Any other questions?